Armed with his Aethershot pistol and trusty battle tome, the Caradron Overlord's Codewright excels at finding advantageous loopholes in the meticulously detailed Caradron code. In this video, we'll be showing you how to paint the Codewright quickly and easily using just 10 paints. So the first thing we need to do is undercoat the model, and for this we've chosen to use Retributor armor. You'll notice on the box art that there is a great deal of gold on the miniature, so undercoating in Retributor armor is really going to give us a head start. You'll also need to have a pot of Retributor armor to hand. This will just help us if we need to do any tidying up. The paints you'll need to follow along with this guide are listed on screen now. Remember, these are just our recommendations. These are your miniatures, so feel free to paint them however you like. If you're new to painting, you can check out the Citadel Colour Painting Essentials videos to learn all about it. The series is linked in the description box below. To start off this guide, we'll be using Retributor armor from the pot, and we'll be using this to base coat over all the gold areas. This might seem a little strange as we've already undercoated the model with the spray can version of Retributor armor. Retributor armor from the pot has a slightly different finish to the undercoat. This is why we're using it just to go over those areas we want to remain gold. This means if we make any mistakes later on, we can easily tidy back up on the miniature. Retributor armor is a base paint, so we need to thin it down with a little bit of water and then apply it on the miniature. You should only need one layer of this, but if you find the coverage isn't quite what you're looking for, just apply a second one too. We're using a small base brush here. We don't need to worry too much about being neat, but this brush will help us be quick and neat at the same time. Once the gold's dry, we're going to use Lead Belcher to paint all the silver details. You'll notice there are a lot of different silver and gold areas on this miniature. It's really up to you which areas you choose to pick out in each colour. However, the box art is always there as a guide, so feel free to refer to that as much as you want to. Just like before, thin it down with some water and apply a few layers. Just take care around the areas that you've decided you want to keep gold. The next thing we're going to do is apply Reikland Flesh Shade over the gold. This is a brilliant shade for gold. It adds depth and richness. When you're using shades over large areas, it's best to split the model up and work in small sections. This stops the paint from drying out too fast and means we don't get an inconsistent finish. This shade will tint the surfaces we're working on and shade into the recesses to add depth. Once that's dry, we're going to move on to using Agrax Earthshade to shade all the silver areas. Agrax Earthshade works really well over a variety of base coats and it adds a really nice grimy effect to the silver. Apply this just as you did before, trying to avoid getting any on the gold where you can. Once both shades have dried, we're going to move on to doing some dry brushing with Necron Compound. This is a lovely bright silver that will act as a really nice highlight over both the silver and the gold. When you're dry brushing, you need to remove as much paint as possible from your brush. Work the brush onto a paper towel or a piece of cardboard in circular and crisscross motions to take off as much paint as possible. Then we build it up on the miniature by moving the brush over the raised details. We'll be doing this in back and forth and circular motions to make sure we catch all those edges. We're also using a small dry brush, as again this will help us get into those trickier to reach areas. Start with a subtle pass of Necron Compound. It's easier to build up layers of dry brushing rather than trying to correct a dry brush that's a little too strong. We're using Necron Compound, which is a specifically designed dry paint. However, if you don't have this at home, you could use something like Stormhost Silver as an alternative. Once you've finished dry brushing, give the model a quick dust with a clean brush. Sometimes dry brushing can leave dry particles of paint on the miniature, and we don't want these to set. After you've finished using metallic paints, give your paint water a quick change. This will stop any shiny flakes getting into your non-metallic paints and making them shiny. Now his mighty armour is finished, we're going to move on to some other areas of the miniature, starting off with Abaddon Black for the clothing, pipes and bookmarks. We've switched to a small layer brush now. This will give us more control and help us be neater around those areas we've already finished painting. You might notice it's a little bit tricky to get this to go over that metallic undercoat. Once the black's done, we're going to move on to the purple, and we're going to use Phoenician Purple for this. As you can see, we're picking out some of the clothing here. This is a lovely deep purple which contrasts really nicely with that gold. Try your best to be neat, but don't worry, you can always tidy up mistakes with the previous colours if you need to. Let's get those pages base coated so our code write can make changes to that Caradron code on the fly. And we'll be using Wraithbone to pick out the paper. We'll also be using this to paint the rock on the base. This will definitely take a couple of layers to cover, so just stick with it and make sure you wait for each layer to dry before you start the next one. Now we're going to move on to the skin, and for this we're going to use Kislev Flesh. We're painting to replicate the box art, so feel free to use whichever skin tone you prefer. You'll see that our code write's grizzled face is packed with loads of fine detail. We don't want to clog this up with paint, so make sure you thin your paint down and apply a few layers onto the face. Next, it's time to move on to some more of those books. We'll be using Dark Reaper to pick out some of the book covers. It's really up to you which ones you want to paint in this colour. Take your time here and try and be as neat as you can. This code write's equipped with a vast library of books, each more precious than the last. So let's paint them all different colours and make them stand out. Now we're going to use Mornfang Brown. We'll be using this to pick out any remaining books, as well as the gloves and the beard. As before, thin your paint down and apply a few layers onto the miniature. When you're painting that distinguished beard, just be careful not to get any onto the skin. With that, all our base coats are done, so we can move on to applying Reikland Flesh Shade onto the skin. We need to thin it down with a little bit of water before we apply it. This will just make sure it's nice and subtle on the skin, and if we find we want any more depth in the recesses, we can just apply some straight into them. Just make sure you allow each layer to fully dry before you apply any more. And the last thing we're going to do is apply Agrax Earth Shade. We'll be applying this in two ways, starting off by thinning it down with some water. The thinned down Agrax Earth Shade will be applied over the paper and the rock. This is because it's going over a really pale base coat. If we applied it straight from the pot, it would just look too harsh on the miniature. Our code write takes good care of his books, so we don't want them to look too aged and battle-worn. Then we're going to apply the shade straight from the pot. This will be going over the purple clothes, the gloves, the book covers, and the mouth. This will be going over the purple clothing, gloves, and the book covers. We'll also be carefully applying some into the mouth and any deep recesses on the skin. This will just add more depth and character to the face. Again, if it pulls too much in any of the recesses, just clean off your brush and use that to soak up any excess. There we are, your code write is finished, ready to cite obscure sections of the Caradron code to expedite the completion of his mission. You can see that we've based our model and we've used Astro Granite for this. If you'd like to learn more about basing, you can check out our video all about it. For more tutorials, tips and tricks, you can head to your local Warhammer store where our amazing staff will be more than happy to help. You can also check out citadelcolor.com. Well, we hope you've enjoyed the video and we'll see you next time. Bye!